With canine wellness, we started looking at the canine wellness wheel with safety. This instinctive, indigenous knowing that is fundamental to all animals. Their need for safety, their need for survival, to feel safe, and how that can interfere and affect their biochemistry, the sensory inputs that they're exposed to, and moving on to balanced emotions. Next on the canine wellness wheel, and not separate or exclusive and independent to, is environmental balance. Environmental balance starts at the very beginning. Like I said before, anything and everything that a dog sees, hears, smells, tastes, touches or feels from before birth to present day can create a biochemical response, can change the biochemistry and influence the biochemistry of an animal, and equally stabilize or compromise their ecosystem. So when we look at environmental balance, first and foremost, we're looking at it from a developmental perspective. We're looking at it from the animal that is developing before birth, the animal that's developing in the uterus and the womb of the mother. So there is some really cool science, some really new science coming out now that's looking at things like epigenetics. Some really great books out there, some really great scientific studies on epigenetics across lots of different species. There's a lot of studies on this in humans, but equally, because it happens at a genetic level, it happens at a DNA level, then it transpires to all animals, it applies to all animals. The subject of epigenetics and what it looks at is really an understanding of, we have the genome. The human genome has been mapped, the dog genome has been mapped, but we have something that really translates to above the genome, and that's what the epigenome stands for. Epigenome, above the genome. So what scientists discovered now is that the epigenome is far more influential than actually the genome itself, and there are many factors that can affect the epigenome and its effect in gene expression, and also the turning on or turning off of certain genes. There's a lot of work that's being looked at in terms of food and how diet itself can affect gene expression through the epigenome, but also what epigenetics looks at is the effect of environment, how environment influences the epigenome and how this again influences gene expression. Now, I've mentioned it very briefly. I'm going to talk about it in more detail within the life stages section, but one of the things that we need to look at in terms of canine wellness and the epigenome and epigenetics is how environment shapes and influences behavior, how environmental conditions affect and influence the epigenome. Now, one of these things that is most important to me in understanding our dogs is emotional states, emotional balance, and how we kind of create this nice, resilient and strong ecosystem that our dogs are, and the ecosystem that our dogs live in. And there is something applicable to the epigenome and epigenetics, which is called transgenerational trauma. Now, this was discovered really as a result of human studies, and again is believed to be applicable across a board of species. Transgenerational trauma really translates to an ancestor. So it's my understanding that scientists have been able to map this to at least 7 generations in terms of ancestry, but it is possible that it goes way deeper than that as well. And certainly when you start to understand the work of shamans and indigenous tribes, then there is this belief that it goes way back, where we have lots of ancestral trauma to release. But the concept of epigenetics and transgenerational trauma is that an animal who has not been exposed to chronic stress or has not been exposed to acute stresses that were so terrifying and so traumatic actually exhibits irrational behaviors, exhibits really deep ingrained fears for no apparent reason or for no understanding from what we can work out. And what has been shown in as I say, different animals, not just humans, is an influence of this is epigenetics. That a parent, grandparent, great-grandparent, great-great-grandparent has actually been a victim of a traumatic incident. And this goes back to what I was saying about in terms of the emotional balance of, if a fear is exhibited by an animal, it is stored harder and deeper, and it's very hard for that animal to unlearn that fear, because then it goes against the animal's safety. So in terms of environmental balance and epigenetics, when a parent, grandparent and ancestor from the lineage of that animal, of that offspring, has been exposed to a trauma, it is possible that transgenerational trauma is exhibited in that animal. the trauma or traumas that an ancestor, as I say, a parent, a grandparent, a great-grandparent, or even further back from that, has been exposed to, is stored at a cellular level, is stored within the cellular memory. It went so much against the animal's safety and survival that that has become a very hard-hitting experience and memory that has been stored, so that if that experience is exhibited again by that animal, then the animal has a memory and has a recollection of how to protect its safety, how to protect its survival, and how to respond. And this is why we have to be so careful with our dogs and understanding, again, not only what might be one dog's pleasure can be another dog's fear, but also understanding that dog as an individual and promoting that orienting response so that fears are not exhibited. Because a dog can only be exposed to so many fears before it can break in that ecosystem. And equally, we don't know for every dog as an individual of what might be a pleasure for one dog might be fear for another individual. So what epigenetics is explaining is the fact that yes, some animals who have not been victims of a traumatic experience or a traumatic event, but there is an experience of their ancestry, their lineage, their parentage having a traumatic event, is actually passed down into the offspring. So that's why I said before, sometimes we think we've maybe had a rescue dog that we've loved that animal and it's been beautiful to coexist with that animal, but equally it's been hard work and it's been quite tiring, and we'd just like to start with a blank sheet of paper. We are not necessarily starting with a blank sheet of paper when it comes to getting a young dog and getting a puppy and coexisting and working with a puppy as a result of epigenetics. But equally, like I said before, epigenetics can also be influenced by the food that we feed our dog. That can affect the epigenome, it can influence the epigenome, and again, certain physical nuances that arise or emotional nuances that arise as well. When I was studying my zoology degree, I came across a really interesting phenomenon called the intrauterine position and also the intrauterine environment. So the term intrauterine basically just means within, which is intrauterine, the uterus. So the environmental conditions that occur as a pup is developing within the uterus of the mother. And this varies depending on individual to individual, and also it varies depending on certain circumstances that a mother is exposed to. So first of all, depending on the food that the mother is fed during her pregnancy, or if a mother is nutritionally distressed, like I mentioned before, if a mother is nutritionally distressed, then that is going to have a knock-on effect of her pups. And some studies, some arguably outdated and crude studies have been done that really look at this effect of the effect it has on the pups, but later on in life as well. So if a mother is not fed correctly whilst she is pregnant, that creates digestive system distress in her body. Because her pups are part of her, blood supply, energetically part of her as well, then that distress feeds into her pups, is stored within the pups even before they're born. And likewise, we can also look at nervous system distresses. If a mother is pregnant and she is feeling unsafe, she is feeling unsafe for her unborn pups. If she is feeling fearful or anxious, these states of anxiety, these states of emotional responses that are not homeostatic in that sense, they are not allowing for pleasure, they're not a calm and safe experience for that animal, then that changes the emotional state, the chemical reactions that occur within the mother, and again that influences the behavior responses and the emotional responses of her pups. So we have to have that bearing in mind. Another phenomenon to do with the intrauterine, the concept of the intrauterine surroundings that I find really interesting is the intrauterine position. So the intrauterine position is a phenomenon and a subject that we can have an understanding of and an awareness of, but it isn't necessarily something that we can change, but sometimes in some circumstances it can help us to have an understanding of what is occurring in our dog that previously we just didn't understand what was happening. So again, the intrauterine position only applies to litter-bearing mammals. There are no scientific studies, well, there might be some out right now as I'm speaking. I have struggled to find scientific studies that talk about this within canines. But canines are mammals and canines are litter bearing, and this phenomenon applies to litter bearing mammals. So I'm pretty certain that this does apply and should apply, and we should be aware of this rule and aware of this subject for our dogs, and simply just understanding this variation among individuals and this variation of canine wellness within our dogs, and also how we can support their ecosystems. So what the intrauterine position explains and describes is that depending on the position of a pup developing in the uterus, they actually develop in a slightly different environment, an environment that is slightly different to their neighbour. So say, for example, we have 5 pups. We have 5 pups that are developing, and the pup in the middle is a male. And just so how nature has allowed, we have in this example a male pup developing in the middle and 2 female pups developing alongside this male pup. So they're in the uterus, they're developing, everything is very fluid, we have exchanges of chemicals and hormones and biochemistry, etc., etc. And so as these pups are developing, they will be creating estrogen because they are females. So they'll be creating estrogen, which will absorb out of their body into the bloodstream and can be reabsorbed by the male in the middle. But because the male is in the middle and either side of him are 2 females, he can absorb higher levels of estrogen than you would naturally expect a male to have and to create. So as he develops into a fully grown pup, into a fully grown dog, he is classed as being feminized. He has feminine features and is generally quite a laid back, easygoing, feminized dog. Now, the reason I pause there is because there are other reasons why a male dog may display these features, which we'll talk about throughout the course. But as an example, as a phenomenon, what can be a cause of that is simply the intrauterine position. Now we've reversed that, and now we say we have a female that is developing alongside 2 males. The female can absorb high levels of testosterone, and the female is labeled, described, categorized in biological terms in the scientific community as being masculinized. Now, one of the things we'll see with that is the female having higher levels of aggressive behavior than you'd naturally expect a female to exhibit. So we actually have this variation within litter-bearing mammals as individuals, and we haven't even got onto functional character yet, of simply depending on the genders that are developing, and the genders of the neighbours can actually influence certain responses that the dog is going to show. So some males and females may be totally neutral, but some males can be feminized and some females can be masculinized. So hopefully the intrauterine position blew your mind as much as it blew my mind when I first came across it. And again, in that sense, you know, people say, oh, but how do I change that, or what do we do about it? Sometimes when we look at canine wellness, for me, it's understanding absolutely everything we possibly can from today and beyond about how we support our dogs as the animal that they are, as the ancient canine that they are, and this is just something that naturally happens in litter-bearing mammals. If, for example, we see a female showing aggressive behaviour and there's not really an understanding for that, and maybe we know that dog really, really well, then sometimes, in some situations, it can be as a result of the phenomenon of the intrauterine position.